Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
We saw Darkest Hour.
Yes, we saw it yesterday. And I wonder if this has an impact, actually, for better and worse. Did you find yourself thinking about the film at all?
In the day since?
Yes.
Tiny bit. Just insofar as I was thinking about it in the car on the way here, and I just thought, you know what, I bet Nigel Farage really loves this film.
It's a real Brexiters film. It feels very jingoistic.
Yeah, it kind of does to me, to be honest. It shows Churchill's kind of first weeks as Prime Minister.
Yes.
So the war's broken out, Parliament is dissatisfied with Chamberlain, he's been appeasing, he's weak.
And he's left the country unprepared for war.
Yeah. And so he's pressured into resigning. And everyone says, well, Halifax should take over. And Halifax says, no, I don't want to do it. So the only person who's going to be able to get a coalition that will get the whole Parliament behind him is Churchill. And no one really likes him, certainly not in his own party. So the film basically portrays this as a sort of... He is the right man for the job, but no one really agrees with that right now. He has to fight his way into being accepted.
Let's clarify that a bit, because actually it's not in his own party that people don't like him. You get the sense that it's in his government, and his government is a coalition government.
Yeah, okay.
So it's made up of people who are not inside his party, thus the whole white handkerchief signaling of whether to approve or applaud or not. But in general, that's right? So basically...
And actually, it's not the other thing I was wrong about just there is it's not about being accepted, but it's about proving that his way of doing things is right. There's this large sort of impetus to make a deal with Hitler, that he'll leave us alone. If we'll give him continental Europe and he'll leave us alone, then we can make a deal of that sort. And Churchill's whole thing is, you've got to fight this.
Yes.
There's no way. It's a line from the trailer actually, which is quite a good line. You can't reason with a tiger when your head is in his mouth.
Yes, that's right. That is a good line. So I mean, I actually thought that in some ways it was very well done. I love the look of it. It feels very stark and minimalist and kind of brown, white, black. It's like, I don't know, a combination of a Rubens painting and an old photograph, right? But done very simply and starkly in a way that foregrounds people, right? So I did like that very much, actually. I loved the look of it. And I adore Kristin Scott Thomas' performance of Clementine Churchill. I thought, she was wonderful. I mean, she's got this incredibly lithe body for her age, yet she looks her age, yet, she's extremely elegant, and also kind of very loving. And I thought the relationship between her and Winston Churchill was wonderful. And she stood out for me because I thought, well, Gary Oldman is wonderful as well in his own way, but he's obviously wearing so much makeup, right, and prosthetics that, he's building a performance with externals. Whereas her, it seemed just so simple and elegant and transparent, right? She really makes an impression out of very little, really. Whereas, of course, he's the central character. So, but I love them both, actually. And of course, you pointed out to me that the king was played by Ben Mendelsohn, whom I thought was one marvellous, really, and unrecognizable. Mendelsohn, what I remember him most as, really, is like stick-thin drug addicts, really. So he's got a heft in this role, right? Which actually one doesn't normally associate with the king. I was very happy to see the king depicted as a person of substance and not just, some wobbly kind of not too bright person, who just got out of Churchill's way.
I think you might. I think Ben Mendelsohn's probably been in more stuff than you remember. I'm just going to have a quick look and see, because it's. Although I know what you mean, he was certainly a kind of wiry mad drug addict in Killing Them Softly.
Yes.
Which is probably what you mainly remember him from.
He's great in that, but also
The Place Beyond the Pines.
The Place Beyond the Pines, he plays a similar character.
Yeah. The Dark Knight Rises, Starred Up. He's the dad in Starred Up.
Right.
Who is a criminal, but not a kind of drug-addled...
Well, but the look is kind of the same, really. I've seen Starred Up as well.
He's in Exodus, Gods and Kings, which is a great film, but no one admits it. He's in loads of stuff, but he's more... He's got a lot more variety. In other words, it wasn't a surprise for me to see him portraying the king in this way, because I didn't come with the bag with the sort of... I didn't have the impression from beforehand that, well, he's just this sort of guy.
Okay, well, as you know, I just didn't even recognise him. You know?
Well, yeah.
I thought he was very good.
And he's not in £200 of makeup. He is just Ben Mendelsohn.
Yeah, and actually I asked you who
was Ben Mendelsohn? You saw the credit at the end, and I said, it's the king.
Right.
Oh, really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I didn't recognise him until the credits
Names
came out.
and faces you can't remember now.
No, I'm very good with faces. That's kind of my only anchor. I know I'm not getting dementia because... kind of my ideas are shaped and I recognise faces. Yeah.
I think Gary Oldman is very good. I think you and I both have a slightly shaky relationship with him. We're not sure.
I don't like him.
Well, yeah,
so let's be clear.
I like him more than you do, but
yes.
he's just one of these guys who can leave me cold sometimes, or it's like he has a kind of reputation for being a chameleon of an actor.
Yes.
Who can play just about anything or sinks into his roles. And actually, I think that is his reputation, makes you notice it more when you watch him.
I find that he's often very skilled. So I think I've seen him from the very beginning, from Prick Up Your Ears and Sid and Nancy and so on. And I've rarely found him less than good, right? But I think it's a fault in an actor that you don't get people to like you. And I've never found him charming or appealing or desirable in almost anything, really. I just find him good, right? And at his best when he's playing really unappealing, characters. I think it's a lack in an actor that that they can't get people to like them.
That's interesting. I mean, there are actors who build their careers out of that. Really, I guess maybe that's like a defining characteristic of a character actor. Actually, people think character actors as well. They're always the second players, but I think probably the reason that they're second players is because they don't have that charisma that gets them to the top.
But that's not true, because people like Claude Rains or Ralph Bellamy, the second string people who played supporting parts, really, Claude Rains is the French police official in Casablanca. He's very charming and very likable, you know. So and I think it's important, particularly when playing like the least desirable, or the least appealing characters, for an actor to somehow make it appealing, or at least intriguing, or at least something that is human and you can engage with.
Yeah, but that's not the same as likable.
That's true, because actually Gary Oldman does do that,
I was thinking of someone like Michael
Shannon.
Michael Shannon.
I think he's the greatest American actor of the moment.
I think he's an absolutely fantastic actor, but I don't think he's ever been likable.
Oh, I do. He was in Mud.
I fell asleep in Mud.
My God, that's a great film.
Well, I was tired.
Yeah, well, that's no excuse. You should have stayed up.
I was tired, and it was a big dark cinema, and nothing happened.
It's a great film.
Okay.
I think I saw that like 4 or 5 times, actually. Okay. And he's very appealing in that, as like a sex kind of, maniac.
Oh, I'll have to give it another go.
He can be charming.
There are things about Darkest Hour and with Gary Oldman's performance that I think the technique is very often on display, both with the performance and with the direction. I notice so often the camera is constantly doing this left to right or right to left tracking. That's like, it helps you go you move between rooms and you follow characters as they go from room to room in this kind of underground kind of war offices. But it's also like you get this kind of peeking behind things, or it just helps the camera sort of reframe, and it's sort of, it's kind of elegant, but at the same time, it's really noticeable. And actually, I noticed it to the point where I felt it was to its detriment. Like, I was noticing this technique, or this style, to the point where it was no longer adding anything to my experience, weirdly.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, people are really down on Joe Wright. I mean, myself, basically, I think he first made a good impression in his Anna Karenina, right? Which was extremely theatrical, really, really beautiful, unafraid of glamour, and with fantastic performances, particularly from Jude Law. I love that.
If that's your first good impression of him, he's made a number of films before that.
I know, that's the problem, but name them and I'll tell you.
Atonement was the big one.
And I remember practically nothing about it except Keira Knightley looking gorgeous.
Pride and Prejudice.
I must have seen that, but there's so many versions I can't tell one from the other.
The Soloist and Hannah were the other two before Anna Karenina.
What's Hannah?
Hannah.
I loved Hannah. That's what Saoirse
Ronan.
Saoirse Ronan. Yes, I love that. And Bana, the Australian actor. Yeah, and it's like a bit of an action film. Yes, no, that I loved, you see.
And then the other one he's done is Pan in 2015.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, so I think actually he's getting short shrift from people because that's a very respectable filmography. And actually, I do think that this film is kind of... It's special in a way. It feels like a chamber piece about history, right? So, the characters are always in focus, right? The background, you get the sense of the social background, but actually it's done very minimalist. The Houses of Parliament, a tube, right? Offices, yeah? But you come out of the cinema having a picture in your head of the look of the film, and the look of that film fits the somber mood.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the narrow focus of the story, that it takes place over these very few weeks where it's basically it's Churchill's appointment or acceptance of the post of Prime Minister up to his speech fighting on the beaches, and the film takes place over Dunkirk.
Yes.
That kind of narrow focus helps the film.
Yeah.
It's not trying to make this kind of large story. It's not the life of Churchill. It's a kind of defining few moments in the life of Churchill.
Yes.
And actually the war effort. I mean, you really get the feeling that this is the entire thing, the entire war, and basically future of the world hinges on whether Churchill can get people to agree with him. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Yes.
Like actually, whereas obviously we had Dunkirk last year, the Nolan film, which gave you this kind of life or death feeling. It's just the actual people on the beach and it just being about survival, which is incredibly impactful. And then this, on the other hand, basically shows you almost nothing of Dunkirk.
Nothing.
The battles, you get
see it on a map.
Yeah, you get a map and one or two kind of montagey type shots.
Yeah.
But it's all taking place politically, and so the feeling is very different. It's about the ultimate. What it conveys is ultimately the same, which is that feeling of a life or death scenario and everything hinging on a single beach. But it's there's a different perspective on it. I think that's actually quite interesting. I bet there's a supercut. I bet you could take these two films and cut them in together and probably make like a 4-hour film that's actually quite coherent.
Well, you couldn't do that because they have such different looks.
I don't think they do. They're both basically everything is basically everything's really taken off.
What do you think is the palette of Dunkirk? Come on,
light green.
Well, I would have said light blue, and grey blue. And this is all like amber and brown.
But it's all washed out like Saving Private Ryan in the end of the day. They all try and make these films look like old film reels, don't they?
It looks beautiful.
Anyway.
I think basically, you see, the only thing that really disturbed me about the film, which is a major, major reservation, is that on the one hand, it's appealing to your emotions. My emotions, at least, responded, right? Like, you're being manipulated, like the scene in the tube where Churchill goes and asks ordinary people, would you surrender? It's incredibly cheap and manipulative. But on the other hand, you find yourself responding to its jingoism. So,
I agree. That was on my mind, that scene in the tube.
Yeah.
As I was watching it, I thought, I know what this is doing, you bastard. And still, I was enjoying it. Actually, there is great joy in seeing Oldman's Churchill interacting with people.
Yes.
I think that's what kind of shows it to be a good character, is that he basically, whenever he's talking, whenever he's on screen, it's interesting. And when he's on the tube talking to... This is when I was thinking about Nigel Farage as well. I was thinking, this is what Nigel Farage wants to be. Yeah. He wants to be someone who can get on the tube and talk to people and rouse them.
Yes.
And not have them think he's a prick.
Yes.
And this Churchill is, he gets on the tube and he's charming.
Yes.
And he's funny and he talks to people, he remembers all their names.
Yes.
And you go, I know what you're doing. This version of Churchill you're building.
I know. I mean,
but I still enjoyed it.
I would have enjoyed it more had it not been such a clearly Brexit film. It may not be. I mean, I don't know whether the filmmakers intended it or not. But it comes across as almost like a premier argument, an emotional argument for Brexit. You're constantly being talked of as an island nation. They will never, we will never surrender, like against those Europeans, and if we do, we will call on, the new countries, blah, blah, right? Which is equivalent to saying we can do business with Australia, right? Like, it's just, so like, it just makes me uncomfortable, So on the one hand, I think it's very pretty. I think the performances are wonderful. I think that kind of cheap jingoism is disturbing. Not the least that I always find it disturbing to find a film that specifically addresses a national context and asks its audience to agree with the notion, weren't we great? Right? That's what it's doing. I mean, I grew up with those Spanish films about the greatness of empire. They were all fascist. And, that kind of discomfort at that being bandied around is...
It's something to be very suspicious of.
Yes, indeed.
Doug Stanhope, the comedian, has this line, he's an American comedian, and he has this line about nationalism where he says, nationalism teaches you to hate people you've never met and to take pride in achievements that you had nothing to do with. Which I think is pretty good.
Exactly.
And this film, I think, is along those lines.
It is.
More of the pride in the accomplishments than the hatred of the other people, but it does have plenty of, you just know that the Nazis are the baddies, and I mean, which they were, but
yes,
but nonetheless, there's a kind of uncritical sort of look. Basically, anyone who would have tried to oppose Churchill is a villain in this.
Yes, I must say, that as a Canadian, I also find it incredibly upsetting and offensive when you have these films about how Britain did it alone that don't mention, Canadian and Australian contributions, really, in terms of both men and women and just money and resources, right? This idea that you did it all alone, pisses me off.
But the film does, although from I know what you mean. And you were when we went to Europe last summer, you were whining about it, and then we got to North France and there was just Canadian flags everywhere. Well, there you go then.
Well, but there you go. France acknowledges it in a way that England never does.
But there's a central part of this film where he's on the phone to Roosevelt in the US, and Roosevelt saying, well, we can maybe spare you a few planes if you can drag them across the border to Canada, but we've got all these acts in place that mean we can't help you out because we're neutral now. And so the film... The film is saying, no, we really did need help.
Yes.
Because Churchill, in fact, and the way it's shot, that Churchill is isolated in basically this phone booth almost, and there are huge black borders off to the side. It isolates him completely.
But still, the main reading of the film is that you did do it alone. So, kind of Roosevelt helped a little bit, right? Though he couldn't, though his hands were tied, but, he did what he could. And what he did is he made planes available across the Canadian border so they could be brought to Canada by horses. But the overall impression of the film is that, this darkest hour is kind of one that, Britain got through on its own. And it's just simply not true. And it pisses me off. And it pisses me off because it goes back into this jingoism. So you did it alone and you're proud of having done it alone. And A, it's just not true. And B, kind of firing that kind of jingoism, on a basis of incorrect facts is also dangerous.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Did Churchill ever get a tube in real life? A tube train? Did this ever happen? Like, how... The fact that there is something so clearly fabricated, unless I am really wrong and this tube scene is related to real life. Yeah, I doubt it did, right?
Yes.
But the fact that there is something so clearly fabricated, I think, is damaging actually to the film insofar as it's portraying itself as a historical drama, not a historical fantasy. I mean, I remember my friend Sam really hated *Inglourious Bastards*, the Tarantino film about World War II, because he said this is all just silly. Like, they didn't have these band of people and Hitler didn't die and what's all this. And I said, well, but the start of the film, like the first thing you see in that film is the phrase "once upon a time in Nazi occupied France," and it turns out that my friend had missed that. He walked in 5 seconds too late, and when I told him that, he was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I get it now. Like, it's a fantasy." I think that in Darkest Hour, you're being shown stuff which is clearly invented just to try and rouse the passions and sell something about Churchill and about the British character, but in the context of something which is supposed to be historically accurate, or you would imagine is trying to be historically accurate, I think that damages the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wish they'd made another film about the relationship between Winston and Clementine Churchill, because I would love to see that. I read their letters. There's a volume of their letters, and it's just so they're just so loving, really, and so kind of mutually supportive and so tender and knowing. And I think the interplay between Gary Oldman and Kristin Scott Thompson really captured
Thomas.
Really captured that. And to me, it's kind of like the strength of the film, right? And it's one of Joe Wright's strengths as a director. He gets really great performances from actors, and the films are always kind of worth seeing because of that. And actually, that's interesting because, in a way, he's nowhere near cinematically inventive, like you were talking about Dunkirk. The films bear no comparison, in my view, as cinema, right? But, the ability to kind of create a memorable look like this film and to get actors like these, performances like these out of actors, it is really kind of a very considerable achievement. And the film also succeeds in rousing people, which is in its own kind of achievement. But actually, I also think it does so cheaply, really,
Well,
cheaply,
I found that the end was not rousing at all, where it really should have been. The end is where he's giving the "fight them on the beaches" speech, and you think that this is the film. I mean, it's actually that speech is undercut in Dunkirk brilliantly. You think a film like this would be one where it's trying to build up the passions, and I think it is. It's saying, we're all fight them on the beaches, and Churchill is great, and we're going to win this bloody thing. And everyone's waving the papers and supporting him in Parliament, and I'm going, why does this feel so flat?
I don't know. I'd be curious, because when I do know what you mean, and I kind of wondered if part of it was because Gary Oldman was doing line readings that you don't remember from the speech, right? And kind of was spacing it out differently. So I didn't know whether, I don't remember. I've heard the speech many times, and I just don't know if I'm misremembering the speech, and maybe kind of Churchill gave the same kind of emphasis and so on, and it just, it's flatter than we remember it.
It didn't sound so familiar to me in comparison to the actual speech, but I think the film, as we've established, is taking so many liberties that if it wants to rouse passions, it should be doing what it wants. I think it is.
Yes. I don't know. I did find it satisfying.
Okay.
And really kind of we stayed watching the credits much longer than I normally do anyway, and when I stood up and looked back, the cinema was still full of people sitting down in their seats. So clearly they found it a very satisfying experience, I think.
Well, to be fair, the only reason that I stayed in my seat was because you did. Like, you normally bugger off straight away.
Yes.
And I hang around for a bit, but I wasn't still sat there because I felt overwhelmed or anything like that.
Well, but the audience, kind of, normally we sit longer than the audience does. And this time when we stood up, the audience was still sitting.
It reminded me, actually, the end and the audience, because the audience was, can we say, largely older people?
Yes.
It was quite full, largely old people. I imagine a few Brexit voters. And the very end reminded me of a comment that I saw. It was the Guardian's review of Dunkirk, I think, and there was a comment underneath it that said the ending was rubbish. The ending of Dunkirk, this is a slight spoiler, I guess, is your main character, I think Finn Whitehead is the actor, is come back and he's sat on the train and they've just been through this terrible ordeal that you, as an audience member, have sat through. It's emotional kind of wreckage. And they've just survived, barely. That's all it is. It's not a victory, it's a survival. And they get a newspaper, and the newspaper has Churchill's speech, the Fight Them on the Beaches speech, and it's read out by Tommy, who's still kind of pretty shell-shocked, really. And so it's this underwhelming reading. It's not read as this great speech that will stand for all time. It's just read out as words on a newspaper page. And I saw this comment on the Guardian website that was from someone who basically missed the point completely, saying what they should have done was have him read that and then have it fade into Churchill's actual recording of the speech. And it's like, that's completely the wrong thing to do. But I felt like that's actually what the end of this film was trying to do, in a way. Get at that, that national passion of this is Churchill saying the speech that we love him for. And that's why it felt so flat. Or that's why it was disappointing that it felt so flat.
Yes. Anyway, I can see what you mean. I think I also just want to single out Lily James. Yeah, who plays Churchill's secretary.
Yeah, his new secretary typist.
Yeah. Who I found, kind of just very, very effective, very pretty, and, kind of plays it very well, I think. There's
a moment between them. In fact, this is one thing that did remain on my mind for the last day, which is that the film is very talky and makes a lot of Churchill's wit and ability to fight with people verbally. And there's a moment where he's dictating a letter or memorandum or speech to his secretary, and it's just the two of them in the room, in these war rooms underground, and he just starts becoming kind of overwhelmed with the stress and mumbling to himself and imagining things, and she stops taking dictation because he's just mumbling to himself, and then he's kind of, the whole film basically slows down at this point and becomes sort of insular, and it's just between these two. They've had a relationship up to this point, but she's just his employee. He sees this photo on her desk and it's of her brother, and he's died at Dunkirk in the past week or so. And he just sits down, and there's a moment between them, and through all their makeup, their eyes connect.
Yes.
And no one says anything. And the film holds it for a really long time. And that I found really touching.
Yes.
I think that's a wonderful moment.
Yes, I think so too.
And it's in contrast with everything else in the film, because the rest of the film is so active.
One of the main themes of the film that I want to mention before we wrap up, is that it's a line that the king says, we want you to lead, not mislead, right? And I think one of the things that the film kind of works through is the importance of telling people what's going on, of including them in the picture, of kind of so not panicking them or not scaring people, but actually kind of being honest with people, right? And I thought that in its way was also kind of very timely, and also maybe a message that's in tension with, the emotional appeal of the film that feels very Brexity.
I think ultimately it's a film that I actually did enjoy, sort of despite myself at times. Like, I could see what it was doing, and I could see the cogs turning. But there are genuinely good things about it, such as you say, Joe Wright gets very good performances out of his actors, and that the film is based largely on seeing these characters interact in interesting ways. I think that and talk. That's a strength. I wasn't thrilled with the way it looked, to be honest. Not as much as you did, but I just felt, to me, it felt kind of like I had seen it done, looking that way. But I don't think that's its main strength. No, not on TV. In film, it didn't surprise me, really. It felt appropriate, but it didn't kind of thrill me or surprise me the way it looked. But
I love the way it looked.
But then I also was thinking, like, imagine if Tom Hooper had done this. It would have been fucking awful. So, at least Joe Wright can use a shot where it's appropriate. Do you know what I mean? So I don't really have anything against that, and I think you picked out some interesting things about the strengths of his direction. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think it's an enjoyable film. It's a film I could watch twice. I wouldn't go back to cinema to see it again, but I could watch it on TV, and I think that the way that the scenes are written and the characters interact it captured me, and I could watch it again sort of despite myself and despite knowing what's going on underneath the surface and finding that a little bit distasteful.
It's nice to see Kristin Scott Thomas in a British film again.
Well, we saw her in The Party.
That's true, which I hated. But she tends to work in French cinema, and actually I think she is really glorious as Clementine Churchill.
Some people just prefer Paris, don't they?
All right, so on that note, I think kind of, we recommend it, really. With reservations.
Yeah, guardedly recommend it.
Right. He's already regretting the recommendation.
This is one of those... I feel like this is one of those where I had a worse time in the cinema than I'm having now. Do you know what I mean? Remember when we saw Home Again and a few films where it's I had such an awful time in the cinema, but then talking about them I was like, oh, this is quite good.
Well, I had a good time.
I think this is a little bit like that, but I did enjoy it, and I did enjoy seeing Gary Oldman in all that makeup, being kind of charismatic and brash and centre of attention and that sort of thing. So there are pleasures in this film.
Good.
But it is all for pensioners.